Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World Together podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today we have a very special guest, Colin Campbell, with Areteanism. He's the founder of Areteanism, a new, somewhat new religious movement that's kind of a secular religious movement. I really kind of enjoyed learning about it. I hope you do too. But we'll just jump in and let Colin give us his intro and take on it. So without further ado, Colin, the time is yours.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's great to be on the podcast. I've listened to, I'd say, most of the episodes of the podcast so far, and I've really enjoyed everything that you guys have talked about. I feel like that it's very much aligned with the vision of what I'm doing with Areteanism. I'm sure, your guests are curious, what you mean by a new religious movement, a secular religious movement. So I'll give just a brief explanation, and then any questions you guys have, I'm happy to answer about that. The basic idea is that Areteanism is a modern approach to religion. And so it's taking modern ideas like science and the scientific method and applying that to how we congregate as people. I believe that community is really important, that we need those functions of organizing in community together, that we need things like ritual and tradition and symbolism to help motivate us to be the kind of people that we want to be. And so Areteanism is a religion that was designed from the ground up. And I should maybe re-emphasize that statement. It was designed from the ground up, whereas most religions happen organically, which we usually associate in a positive light. But in this case, organically means that, the telephone game being played for thousands of years, people just adding on things hodgepodge without really thinking about the consequences. Areteanism is fundamentally different from all other religions in that way, in that it was designed, that we asked critical questions using first principles logic to say, how do we actually want the end result to be? What actions do we need to take now to get to that end result? And so it is a fundamentally different kind of religious experience than most traditional religions, but it is still a religious experience where people gather together in an organized community. We have symbols and rituals and a certain amount of dogma, not very much, but a little bit of dogma that helps kind of organize our worldview and get us all on the same page and work together towards a common goal. So that's the very fundamentals of what Areteanism is.
So you could say it has been intelligently designed.
Yes, I suppose you could say that. Yes, yes, we would argue that perhaps it's one of the few things that's been intelligently designed, but I don't want to take too much credit there. Obviously, the design is an ongoing process. One of the things that's also radically different about Areteanism compared to other religions is that we're not beholden to an old way of doing things. We're not beholden to an original way of doing things. So even in the time that it's existed, I founded Areteanism back in 2016. So we've been around for 7.5 years now, going on 8. We've had a lot of changes. We've had a lot of growth. Certainly a lot of my original ideas are still present, but we've polished some of those original ideas and kind of, rounded the corners off on some of them. And a lot of new ideas have also come in. We've been very careful about adopting new ideas. We want to make sure that we're not accidentally moving too fast and breaking things, to reference Mark Zuckerberg there. But we do believe that we don't have to do things the way that Colin Campbell originally set them out to be in 2016. I'm just not that important. If new ideas are good and relevant, then we incorporate them. So it's a design in process. We're continuing to design, hopefully intelligently.
Although coincidentally, it so happened that the religion has existed through the end times in the last couple of years. just in time for what appears to be the end.
Sorry, go ahead and finish yours. Just in time for
what do you mean by the end, Mark? We still got.
No. I mean, just like it's just like it's a good timing to just like start your own religion thing going, and then like have these pandemics and wars and stuff.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it's like sort of a timely.
Yeah. If anything, I wish that I had gotten this started a few years earlier. Of course, the way that life works out, I don't know that I would have been capable of starting it a few years earlier, but we are really concerned about saving the world, as your podcast has aptly put it. The term we use, there's a few different terms that all kind of mean the same thing. Some people call it the meta crisis. The term that we tend to use in our community is the poly crisis. That right now the world is facing multiple existential crises, as in each one of these crises is, potentially existential on its own. And then you have them all factoring together, all layering together in this really complex web that starts to feel a little bit intractable in a lot of ways. That there's almost no way to make progress again, because in order to make progress against this crisis, you'd also have to make progress against that crisis. And how do you solve all of that? We do think that Areteanism is actually a solution to these problems. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to fix things instantaneously, but we do believe that our approach can actually at least begin to address the whole range of polycrises across the board, ranging from pandemics to failing democracies to climate change to the whole gamut, AI risks, etc.
The wars, the AI, the alien invasion of the things that are happening at the same time.
So I realize that that's a bold claim, and we can dig into that more in a little bit if you'd like. But yeah, we do actually think that that in the face that while Areteanism we think would have always been useful in our current context, where we're sort of rapidly approaching some sort of hypothetical singularity that and we just have so many things going on at the same time. Areteanism is sort of a fresh worldview and a fresh approach to improving things from the bottom up, to really make that grassroots difference in what kind of people we have on the planet. And I think that that's the only way that we will solve the polycrisis, is to improve the kind of people we have on the planet.
Yeah, well, at this point, we hopefully aren't approaching a literal singularity.
I agree. I hope we're not.
Well, it's definitely the main reason that I kind of was attracted to Colin's work and asked him to come on as a guest, is it really is very much in line with everything we're trying to do. And that was one of the biggest issues I had with some religions in general, is the people who are kind of in the mode where they've almost given up, because they're just kind of expecting Armageddon, or they're expecting, Jesus Christ or whichever savior to come and save us. And that,
or even worse, they're trying to proactively bring about that.
And that's even worse. Exactly.
Right. They're maybe encouraging and excited for the idea of a nuclear war in the Middle East or something like that.
Exactly. And that's extremely, extremely sad and painful for me as a somewhat religious guy myself in the past. And I've kind of gone through different phases of into religion. But just that part of it by itself is, I think, something we definitely have to fix about religion, is that negative mindset where, the end is coming, let's not worry about it. And and this is, again, why I really like Areteanism as an idea that it can work for any religion, for any person. You're not saying that other religions aren't right or wrong. You're just saying, okay, let's focus on the real problems, the scientific issues, the things we all can kind of prove and understand to make mankind better and to work towards solving these big problems.
Right. And one of the things that I think is important to mention with what you're saying there is that Areteanism does not have an approach of telling people what not to do. And that includes, we don't do a whole lot of telling people what to believe in their personal life. We do have some general statements of, we support the scientific method. We're opposed to superstition being involved in our decision making. But, in terms of what people want to sort of believe about after this life, Areteanism doesn't make any statements about that. So we're neither saying that there is or isn't any kind of afterlife. We're just not making statements about that. But what we are saying is that we do know that we've got this life. Maybe there's a life after this one. Maybe there's some sort of heaven or other spiritual experience. We don't know about that. We don't know. So since we don't know, let's not plan on it. Let's plan on the things that we do know. We know we've got this life, and a nuclear war right now, it would be very bad. So let's work against that, right? Let's do the things right now that would actually make life better in the ways that we can sort of like measurably prove it would make life better, rather than some sort of hypothetical of like, oh, if I just believe, then things will magically get better, in the next life, if that exists. So we just find that to be not a good strategy, I guess, is what it comes down to. And so we'd rather do things in a more evidence-based fashion.
Yeah, I feel like it just catches all sides that way. It's like if there exists, if you guys are right or you guys are right, great, that's wonderful. But if you're wrong, it's nice to just have your bases covered and at least try to understand that, let's just work on what we know is good for everybody. Let's work on what we know is right for us and right for the world, and not worry as much about what comes after. Perhaps. Well,
I'm just trying to envision how the skeptics of the world would respond to an evidence-based religion.
So far the answer is that we haven't had that many people jump on board. Truth be told, we're still a small movement. We're mainly based in San Diego, California, in the United States, is where our only in-person community is right now, and that's because that's where I live. but we do hope to grow. We do have a number of adherents who live in other places besides San Diego. So we have some members scattered across the United States, and we have some members scattered across the globe even. And then we have, aside from members, official members, we have sort of, fans or adherents, or I don't know what the right word is, but it's sort of, other people that like what we're doing but haven't officially joined yet, that are also scattered across the United States and across the globe. So we are growing, and we are growing on an exponential scale, actually, but it is a very, very, very slow exponential scale. We're still in the very beginning of that exponential scale, where we're measuring growth in single digits at a time of having one person join, having 4 people join, having 3 people join, having 5 people join. So we're measuring growth in a very small number right now. I do expect that will change as we grow. One of the biggest sources of skepticism, in my opinion, about what we're doing is our size. I hope that no one will be offended for me sort of using a real world example of religion and how people justify things in their mind. But I'm going to point to the Catholic Church, this very large organization that I think that probably most of your listenership is going to be familiar with. If you think about it objectively, a lot of the things that the Catholic Church does are pretty weird, right? You have to play the whole Simon Says game, during the Mass, sit down, stand up, kneel down, stand up, over and over and over, right? You have to make sure that you're doing things with, wafers and wine, and maybe you're having little things sprinkled on you at various times. And there's I'm not saying that any of it's bad. I'm just saying that objectively it's weird, right? As in it's not normal, right? It's not a thing that you do in normal life. You'd only do it if you're Catholic. But no one bats an eye, right? No one thinks that this is weird. Why does no one think it's weird? It's because so many people are doing it, right? Because there are literally hundreds of millions of Catholics in the world. And so this is a very normal thing that everyone's been exposed to. So my point is that I think that a lot of the skepticism that we currently face is not actually based in what we are doing. It is actually based in our small size, and that as we get larger, and we've already seen this, that the larger we get, the less resistance we have, that when someone comes for the first time, people now, 7 years into the project, are much less skeptical than they were when it was, 6 months into the project and I was the only one doing it, right? If someone showed up, 6 months in, basically what they had to do is they had to commit to sitting down with Colin Campbell and stare into each other's eyes for an hour. It's a really awkward experience, right? No one wanted to come back after that. Well, fortunately, somebody came back, and then eventually another person came back, and another, And so as we've grown larger, when people show up, it feels just a little bit more real to them. And then the bigger it gets, the more real it gets. And so now we have less skepticism, and I'm sure that we're going to have even less skepticism as we go forward. That was kind of a lot, so I'll turn it back over to your question.
Yeah, so I just have a couple questions. It's a good time to kind of turn on to the ritual side of things. I'm very curious, and this is definitely one of the things that I wasn't so much skeptical about, because I understand the value of rituals and the value of things, but it definitely caught me off guard, some of them. I was like, I'm not sure if I understand. I just know that a lot of people would have challenges kind of accepting these things. It seems a little culty, let's just say, or it seems a little awkward. Like you said about the Catholic Church. I feel extremely awkward when I go to a Catholic church with a friend and sit down, just because it's not what I'm personally used to. But you're right. So I'm just kind of curious from your side, from a secular religion, was it really necessary to have these kinds of rituals? And what did you kind of have in mind? Is it possible that someone could form a branch of Areteanism without these rituals, perhaps? Is it required? What's your feeling there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I would start to answer that by talking about the necessity of rituals. I think it is really the core of what you're talking about. Yeah. I do think that they're necessary. I don't think that these rituals specifically are necessary, but I also think that these rituals have been very carefully designed, and so any alternatives would need to be more carefully designed. And knowing how much work we had to put into these rituals, I just know for myself that is a tall order, and so I am skeptical of if someone proposed a new ritual to me right now, my first reaction is going to be, well, are you prepared to have literally 100 hours of discussion about this ritual before we put it into practice?
Okay,
because that's what it takes, right?
Would you mind walking us through kind of the basic rituals beginning to end, just briefly?
Sure.
As much as you're willing to share today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of rituals, but I think the ones that people are going to be most interested in is our membership rituals. So we divide membership in the assemblage of Areté into 4 different stages. And it's designed to give people sort of this progression continuum of how much commitment you have to the organization and to the movement. And that way, people are really encouraged and empowered to only bite off what they want to chew, right? So you don't while we hope that, of course, people will take on larger and larger commitments, there's not a whole lot of pressure to do that. That if what you want to do is just be a first level member and you don't want to advance past that, you can totally do that. So we make use of the classical elements of the ancient world as sort of core symbols for us, just because they're well recognized symbols that can carry a whole lot of symbolic meaning in them, that each one of the symbols themselves is a little bit neutral, and so we can pack what kind of meaning into them that we want to pack into. So that's fire, water, air, and earth. And so the fire membership is our introductory stage of membership. And then water is the sort of committed adult stage of membership, where you're actually doing it. And then the air membership is the lower rank of leadership, where you are a leader, but you still need to have a little bit of supervision, basically. And then the earth level is that senior level of leadership that provides the supervision to the air level. So we have a mnemonic that we use to briefly describe all 4 levels, and that is, I like it, I'll do it, I'll lead it, I'll build it. So again, that's the fire level is I like it. The water level is I'll do it, which is different from I like it. Just being a fan versus actually sort of following the practices and being on board with sort of the whole program, so to speak. Air is the I'll lead it stage, where now you're, official leader and you can do almost all of the things required to run the organization, almost all of them. And then the earth membership is the I'll build it stage, where you're specifically building up the leadership, building up that air cadre to help move things forward. So we have different membership rituals for entering into each one of those 4 stages. So the first one is very dramatic. We call it the flame walk. We build a wall of fire. So it's this horizontal wall of fire. And then the person walks through that wall of flame. It is a bit scary. And there is a little bit of danger involved, but we've specifically engineered the way that we do this to be pretty minimal danger. So if you've ever passed your hand through a candle flame before, this is the same physics phenomena that's going on. That as you're walking through the fire, you have a little cushion of air around your body. And as long as you walk right through the fire, that cushion of air is going to push the flames out of the way, because flames are just hot gas. And so gas will push gas out of the way. And you won't get burned as long as you walk right through. Now, if you stand over it, you're going to get burned. But if you just walk through, you don't get burned.
Interesting.
And so the symbolism there is that you are walking towards the light, even if it means walking into the fire to sort of seek an enlightened world, that you'd be willing to take on a little bit of risk, you'd be willing to face a little bit of danger in order to actually get some kind of enlightenment in your life. And so, yeah, it's a very dramatic first step. Some people have kind of said, geez, that's the first step, is you have to walk through fire?
That's exactly what I thought. Yeah.
But actually,
two quick thoughts about
the name
it.
of the religion is Areteanism, and I guess we haven't talked about that yet, but that literally Areté is this Greek word that means being as great as you can possibly be, both as an individual and as whole communities of people. And so, yeah, we're a religion that is about being great people, and we're not for everyone, and that's okay. We want everyone, but we also sort of acknowledge that we're not for everyone. And if you're not willing to walk through fire to prove that you actually want this, that you actually want an enlightened world, you're not really ready for Areteanism.
I just have two quick thoughts about the fire test or ritual. I think it's pretty scientific, but it's also fairly Darwinian. If somebody is not incapable of understanding, they need to walk through, they sort of eliminate themselves. So that's, I guess, a scientific element. So of course I'm joking. But the other one is hopefully you don't want too much enlightenment. There's a certain, if you caught fire, for instance, that would be a degree of enlightenment of the general area.
You don't want this to be your last moment of enlightenment.
No, but the physics phenomenon that you described makes sense. I think that's also walking on walk charcoals or something,
right.
works on it's like a similar principle of insulation. If you walk quickly, you just must not.
Didn't you start with the charcoals, Colin? Is the wall of fire new or?
No, this is the way that we've been doing it since the beginning. I definitely did in the design process. I was considering the coal walking, but that is more logistically difficult, and it requires basically more training. One of the things I was thinking about was just scalability. That it's not always going to be me that's the one officiating the event. In fact, these days it rarely is me that's officiating the event. And so, I wanted to make sure that this was going to be something that could be produced, that could be replicated in mass, that we could literally have, tens of thousands of Areteans, hundreds of thousands of Areteans joining every single week. And, we'd have a safe way of doing this. So, the wall of flame is easier to produce, is safer to manage. We do, of course, have safety practices. We have a whole checklist of safety things that we do, and we have, a fire extinguisher nearby, and we have a hose nearby, and a first aid kit, and people who are specifically designated for safety roles, that kind of thing. So and we're just very confident that this is safe. We've never had an accident with this. But even if we had an accident, we'd be ready to manage it. And the bottom line is that if one day enough people doing this, if we literally had millions of people doing this, somebody's going to get hurt eventually, one day. And frankly, that is a risk that we're just taking. That we just think that it is worth that risk. That so to kind of go back to the necessity of ritual. Speaking from my own personal experience, and I guess my observed experience of all the people I've seen do the flame walk so far, it is deeply transformational. Even though there is no magic to it, no literal magic, we don't believe that there's actually a magic spell or magic power that overcomes you when you walk through the fire. Technically speaking, nothing about you changes from one side of the flame to the other side of the flame. The reality is that because we've built up this symbolic experience, because we teach people about the symbolism before they do it, because there's a community involved that is supporting you and also believes in the symbolism. When you walk through the fire, you feel different about yourself. You're now a person who has walked through fire to be here. You're a person who could walk through fire again if you needed to. It really changes your perspective of what you can do in your life. From that point on, the next time that you're facing something difficult, you can literally, not figuratively, literally say to yourself, I have walked through fire before. And so your attitude about what you can and can't do is different. And so I do believe that rituals are necessary, but rituals are sort of like the big guns of religion. I think that, I'm also ex-military, and so, you'll have to forgive me for just using a lot of military metaphors. But, rituals are kind of like the artillery of social engineering, that they pack a big wallop. And so you have to be really careful that you're pointing it at the right target, because there can be collateral damage with it. And that's really been the problem with religion in the past, is that these rituals that other religions have done, to be frank, they were not designed. They just got kind of hodgepodge together. And so there's a lot of collateral damage. And yeah, sometimes there is some good that's done by these other religious rituals, but there just ends up being more collateral damage than good. By very, very carefully designing these things, by very carefully targeting what the experience is going to be and thinking about what kind of downstream consequences, second and third order consequences, we can be sure that we are getting the full firepower of utility of ritual, but on the right target. And I think that flame walk is a critical example of that. Of course, we also have rituals for the second stage, the third stage, the fourth stage of membership, and then we have weekly rituals and other kinds of we have rituals galore, but we've just very carefully managed each one of those to say what should that experience really be like.
That's cool. I mean, you explained it really well. Like I think you've kind of cured my skepticism a little bit about the flame walk. What do you think, Martin? Could you do a walk through a flame wall? Are you in?
I'm not sure what my hair would do in that situation. Have you tried it with any people with long hair?
We have, yeah. Fortunately, that's not a risk. We do, of course, some of the safety precautions that we give people in advance is we ask people to wear pants and to wear closed-toed shoes. The closed-toed shoes is more about avoiding
no flammable hairspray.
No
flammable hairspray, right? But the reality is that, again, when you're moving, you're just going to pass through that heat so quickly that it's kind of not an issue. Also, the fuel that we're using for the fire burns at a low enough temperature is also part of how this works. But I mean, when I say low enough temperature, it's still a scary experience. I can tell you. So every time that we have new people do it, we have an officiant walk through the fire first to sort of demonstrate how it's done. And so I've been the officiant a number of times. So I've flame walked more than just one time. I've flame walked, a dozen plus times. I can tell you that when the fire is building up, before it's actually go time, and you're standing there probably about, 4 meters away from the fire or something like that, you feel that heat rolling off of it. And even I, having done it a bunch of times, I have that kind of like moment in my head of like, oh, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to walk towards that fire? Because the fire gets tall. It gets to be, at least a meter tall, and sometimes it's more like a meter and a half tall of, how tall that flame wall gets. And so you feel the heat and you see this huge wall of fire, and it's not a normal thing to walk towards fire. But again, that's where the psychological power comes in.
Yeah, also possibly for Darwinian reasons.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not actually believers in social Darwinianism. We do believe in evolution, but we're not trying to cull the population.
I mean, just people are generally evolved to not do things that usually are bad for your health, because everybody who was that way was kind of selected out.
We're fighting against the natural man. We're fighting against the natural man and kind of rising above it by breaking our boundaries, breaking the
but seriously though, I've been doing a lot of joking this whole time. But seriously, I appreciate as a sort of a scholar of I published a book about astrology recently, and elements are a very Greek, very important thing or aspect of astrology specifically. And I think astrology is one of those things that actually historically comes closest to religion that's thought out or designed, because I think that's to them it was the most science there was, but they still made a connection between, in astrology specifically, between celestial bodies and deities, but you still needed to do the science of calculating the motions of the planets in order to be able to do the thing. And elements, I particularly appreciated that you use them in the right order, because fire, water, air, earth are 1, 2, 3, 4, literally from numerology. So I do like that. It just shows that it's actually thought out. But also even the meaning that you sort of assigned to them through the levels and stuff also checks out with the interpretations, classical interpretations of what the elements mean, because many people who don't know anything about it, don't really know anything about it, would just think that they meant just elements are just elements, like fire is just fire, water is just water. But they were always intended to be symbolic and had layers of abstract meaning that had actually more profound significance, even originally, even back in the day, even to the people who invented it, very probably. So maybe I guess we don't have to necessarily go through all the rituals or anything.
I'm kind of curious briefly what the other 3 are. I think I read them on the internet.
Or maybe just example, an example of the other one.
Yeah, happy to just sort of briefly go through them. So the second stage, the I'll do it stage, is immersion. And so we go to a body of water, whether that is a swimming pool or the ocean, is where we've recently been doing it since we live in San Diego. And people just get dunked in water. Again, we actually do have a little bit of flexibility with how the rituals are performed. So on this most recent round of immersions that we had, then rather than sort of proactively dunking someone in water, we had a particularly high wave day that day. And so basically we waded out into the water hand in hand and faced the oncoming wave and just let these huge waves just slam over us, on top. But you get totally soaked through. And so the symbology is that you're getting totally immersed, inside and out, with the ideals of Areteanism. It's no longer just a cool thing that you think is fun, that you like. It's now this thing that's in you, and it's part of your identity at this point, and this is who you're going to be. And so we also have a metaphor of the sword of an adventurer and sort of Joseph Campbell's heroic journey and that kind of thing, right? And so in the flames of the firewalk, your sword is being forged, but then you have to quench that steel for it to actually be hard enough to be useful, right? And so that's happening in the waters of immersion. Then the third level, the I'll lead it stage, is pilgrimage. I'll actually be leading someone on their pilgrimage to be an air member. Sunday will depart to go on a pilgrimage for this person. So what that is for 3 or 4 days, then a person goes to a place of their own choosing. They pick their own destination for a place to pilgrimage to, and it's an ascetic journey. So you fast, you do community service, you spend time in education, meditation, and then ultimately, you have some sort of culminating experience, which usually is going to be going to some sort of natural vista. But there can be, different approaches to this. Like, for example, someone could technically go to an urban location for their pilgrimage, and then maybe they would climb up to the top of a skyscraper for a vista from the top of a skyscraper. For myself, when I went on my pilgrimage, I went to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. And so I hiked down to the bottom and then back up to the top of the Grand Canyon. But you have some sort of culminating experience. And then from that culminating experience, then now you return home triumphantly. And when you return home, then now you are a triumphant hero of the assemblage of Areté, and you're ready to be a leader in our organization.
Cool.
And then the fourth stage is called stewardship. And that is you pick a plot of public land, relatively small plot to sort of be manageable. I'm not going to be able to give a good measurement off of that. My brain doesn't do area very well. But you pick a small plot of public land, maybe about the size of like a traffic intersection for context. And you take responsibility for that land for the rest of your life, to do whatever is necessary to make that land better, with no promise of reward. It's only responsibility. And that symbolizes taking on responsibility for the whole world. And so actually specifically what you do during the ritual is we use dog tags. So I have so you get a pair of dog tags with your name on it. It says the assemblage of Areté and the date that you claim stewardship. And then you go and you bury one of the two dog tags, because dog tags come in a pair. You bury one of the dog tags in the ground at the site of your stewardship, and then you wear the other one around to kind of remind you to reunite the pair. And so every week during our weekly ritual, then you pass your hand through a candle, you dip your hand in some water, you dry your hand off on a towel representing a flag flapping in the air, and then you reach into an urn of earth, urn of soil, and you take a pebble. And for the earth members, when you take that pebble, what it represents is the commitment to go back to your stewardship and do the work necessary to take care of it that week. So every week you're visiting your stewardship at least one time. So those are the four membership rituals.
That's basically a comprehensive overview of the main basic categories of religious rituals. Like, I think it's just like, apart from sacrifice, maybe, but like specifically,
we haven't finished the design for the human sacrifice. That's coming down the road. We'll probably announce that next year.
No, like, again, seriously, it's like trial by fire, baptism, pilgrimage, and taking care of some sort of sacred land. I think like those are like usually just in the earth element. I think the other big one usually was temple building.
Temple building, yeah, that kind of goes hand in hand.
If you like put it to the absolute extreme of the earth element.
Yeah, well, I think that eventually we will be building our own structures. Right now we're too small and too poor to be doing that. But I do think that eventually we will be building sort of, nice, beautiful temples to the ideals of Areteanism, and we'll fall on the earth members to be the shepherds of that process of, building and maintaining those temples at that point.
I'm curious about the earth members. If someone moves or changes jobs or locations, are they able to just pick up their dog tags and choose a new location? Is that how it works?
Yeah, this is a great question. So one way of thinking about it is that, stewardship is essentially like getting married, except you're just getting married to a piece of land instead of being married to a person, right? But just like being married, you can get divorced. And so that is an option. One of the central concepts of Areteanism is consent. So we believe that everything needs to be done with consent, and for something to really have consent, it also needs to be revocable, right? And so we empower our members to revoke their membership if that's what they want to do. So you could be a fire member and revoke your membership entirely, or you could be air member and revoke your air membership just down to water membership if you wanted to, or revoke it entirely. Likewise, if you're an earth member, you could basically get divorced from your stewardship, and that would mean that you are no longer an earth member, but then you could get re-promoted to an earth member later. So if you move, then you could say, there's really just no way for me to take care of this stewardship, so I am going to have to, separate myself from that. But we're just going to acknowledge that, okay, if you're not taking responsibility for that, that land anymore, then actually we want you to step back from those senior leadership responsibilities and just be at the leadership level instead of the senior leadership level. And when you're ready to claim a new place, then we can have you step back up again.
It's just it's very interesting to me, again, with this sort of Greco-Roman astrology context, because like the religion or the principle that Areté is based on is very much the core principle of those civilizations, and that's a core principle of the age of Aries. And the sign of Aries is very much about individual choice and individual self-realization. I think the other word that I've heard some people discuss, even though it's like lost today. It's like after 2,000 years of Christianity, is not really a concept. It's very related to Areté is sophrosyne, and that's basically the principle of know thyself,
right?
Like of like ideal self-knowledge.
Yeah, that's actually, one of the things we have sort of enshrined in doctrine for ourselves. We call it the Delphic admonition, because the words "know thyself" were inscribed, in stone outside the temple of Delphi, and they were inscribed there as sort of a warning, right? That before you went into the temple to seek the mysteries of the oracle, that you were warned that you need to know yourself first. Otherwise, you're going to end up with tragedies like Oedipus and things like that, right? There's a whole ton of Greek tragedies where people misinterpreted what the oracle had to say to them, and so the warning is that you need to know yourself first, right? That's where wisdom starts. It can expand from there, but the first principle is to know thyself. So one of the practices that we have is it's a little bit more of a tradition. It's not something that's quite a ritual, but Areteans put the words "know thyself" near the entranceway to their home, either on the inside or outside of their home. As sort of a matter of practice.
Yeah, like the oracle in Matrix.
Right. Yes. Yeah. She had a Temet notes above her door. Right. Exactly. So yeah. So sometimes Areteans will put it in Latin, sometimes they'll put it in Greek, sometimes they'll put it in English, or whatever your local language is, I suppose. But yeah. So that's definitely a thing that we quote often in the assemblage is the reminder to know thyself.
All right. Well, I'm definitely intrigued. I'm very so I'm kind of curious if someone was watching this, say, on the other side of the world, and they were kind of all in and they wanted to join, would they have to go to San Diego where you guys are physically located, or is there some way they could do it remotely? What's your feeling on that so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, we'd want them to just sort of to start by getting involved, which you can absolutely get involved remotely. So we maintain a Discord server, and I can make sure that you're able to provide the link to any listeners, but we have a public Discord server that people can join in. We do have some rules in our Discord server that are a little bit unusual compared to most public Discord servers. We are explicitly not anonymous in our Discord server, so I'm just going to mention that right now in case people are like, oh yeah, I want to join the Discord. Just to be aware that we ask every single person when they join our Discord to change their nickname in Discord for our server to their real name. You can just do your first name if you want. We encourage people to do first and last, honestly, but it's actually really important to us that for the culture of that server, we want to maintain a real identity aspect of this, that you should be courageous enough to say, hey, this is actually who I am. Even if you're not a member and you're saying, I'm not even sure if I want to be a member, that's okay. You don't have to be a member, but like respect our process of like, we want this to be a place where you're not anonymous. And so therefore you behave in a not anonymous fashion, right? Yeah. So, okay, with that caveat out of the way, we have the Discord server so people can get involved there. The next step is we are hoping that very soon we will start offering our weekly meetings on Zoom again. We had been offering them basically since the beginning of the pandemic through to pretty recently. But then we had just a few too many technical problems, and so we need to get just a little bit more on the ground logistical support here in San Diego to feel confident putting that Zoom out to the public again. Basically, we're just a little bit nervous that we don't want someone's first experience with Areteanism to be filled with technical difficulties and to have that put a bad taste in their mouth. There's a chance that we could get, maybe like quasi-famous people, like famous YouTubers or whatever, might come into our server, and then if they have a bad experience and then tell that bad experience to all their followers, that would be really detrimental for the movement. So until we can be sure that we've got our ducks in a row with that, we're not broadcasting our weekly meetings. But we hope to start doing that again soon so people could attend our weekly meetings. But then aside from that, there's just a lot of things you can do on the Discord to sort of be involved in the community. From there, the next step is to have discussions with anyone who is an Air member or above, and to start talking about like, hey, I'm actually interested in membership. And what we would do at that point is we would figure out one of three options. Either it would make sense to fly you to us, which I think is, if you're just sort of like a one-person group wherever you are, that's probably the option that makes the most sense, is get you to come to us, get you to see what our community is like in person, actually get to put some faces to names, that kind of thing, and feel tied into the community. And we'll have a flame walk here in San Diego. If you've got kind of a whole nucleus of people in your local area that are like, hey, we all want to be Areteans, we'll fly somebody out to you and we'll make that happen, and we'll flame walk you all, at your location. The third option, if the flights for whatever reason are just not realistic for us to do that, is we could have you flame walk yourself. When the religion first started, I, as the founder, did not have anyone to officiate my flame walk, so I officiated my own flame walk. So there's a precedent for that, right? One of our core principles, one of our 3 tenets, is the intent of the law is the law. And what that means is that we don't follow the rules dogmatically. We don't say, oh, it says exactly these words, and now we're going to legalistically interpret. We don't do that. We say the intent of the law, the reason why words were given, whatever those words were, whether it's instructions about how a ritual is performed or instructions about how to organize a local community, those are all just guidelines, basically. And they're guidelines with a purpose, and you shouldn't be breaking them willy-nilly. But you can break them if that's the right thing to do, right? And so while our instructions say that there's an officiant who leads you through the flame walk, if the right thing to do is to have you just do it yourself, we'll give you all of the information. We'll spend a lot of time on Zoom walking you through all of the safety procedures and making sure that you know exactly how to do it. And we'll probably have you set up a camera to record the event or something, but we'll have you flame walk yourself if that's what it really comes to.
So that's like the Pirates of the Caribbean. It's like, more like
maybe more like guidelines.
I like it. So I'm kind of curious, as far as reach out or reaching out. Missionary work is the typical term for most religions. Do you have any plans to kind of do stuff like that in the near future, as far as sending people out? That's typically how most religions kind of get started, is they send people far and wide to do the actual initial things like the flame walk.
Yeah,
specifically Mormonism.
Well,
right.
Yes.
A random example.
Certainly some of my context is I grew up Mormon and I went on a Mormon mission for 2 years, and so I ended up leaving the Mormon Church when I was 24. Actually, timed things such that I left on my 24th birthday. But that's something I'm actually very familiar with, and I think that there's a whole lot that we do in Areteanism that is actually sort of modeled after Mormonism, because for all of my complaints about Mormonism that led me to leave, I actually think that frankly the LDS Church is very well organized, and it kind of gets a lot of things right in terms of how to make community happen, how to make a structure be sort of stable, how to develop leadership from within. There's a lot to be said about it, and so for any listener who maybe is less familiar with Mormonism and maybe comes with a lot of sort of bias against Mormonism, I want to say that I completely understand. That's why I left. But I also think that if you're not super familiar with Mormonism, it's actually something worth studying, even if you have no intention to ever join, just because it is so well organized. There's a lot of lessons to learn there. So, anyways, as to missionary work. We certainly believe that outreach is a good thing to do, and that all of our members are encouraged to do that at all stages. But specifically at Air membership, that is sort of the level where you are explicitly taking on the responsibility for outreach at that point. That you, as an Air member, you now should have enough knowledge and experience with Areteanism that you should be capable of confidently answering interview questions like what we're doing right now, that theoretically any other Air member could be getting interviewed, whether it's by local TV news or by a podcaster or whoever, that they're authorized to speak on behalf of the assemblage in that fashion. So Air members, they do a little bit more responsibility for outreach, even though everyone does some outreach. And we do think that eventually we will call people to be full-time missionaries. We're not sure if they will go door to door the way that LDS missionaries do, though I have to admit I'm also a little bit out of touch with what the LDS Church does these days. But my impression is that compared to when I was a missionary, LDS missionaries are doing a lot less door to door than they used to. Yeah, and I think that's just because in the modern era, door to door is just not as good of a tactic as it once was. I think once upon a time it was a great tactic. These days it's not so good. So that's not off the table. There are still some benefits to door, particularly doing door to door in your local community as opposed to going someplace else and doing door to door. So we have talked about maybe we're going to do some more door to door efforts here in San Diego, basically like within walking distance of where we meet, because that's people who could walk to the meeting place, right? But we'd probably have our full-time missionaries doing other kinds of outreach work. Maybe part of their job would be to go to another nascent community. We call our communities villages. So maybe, going from our San Diego village to one of the other brand new starting up villages that could use a little bit of extra support to get off the ground, and have someone who's actually going to be sort of like going to all of the meetings and is going to, actually like help find new people for that community. That might be more the way that we would have that work.
Yeah. Very cool. Financially speaking, do you have like a tithing kind of thing? How is it supported in general? Is it?
We don't have a tithing thing. I have to admit that as someone in an organizational role here and managing budgets, I do sometimes wish we had a tithing thing. It would make things a lot easier, but we don't. We actually.
I'm just have to say I'm glad to hear it as a baptized Czechoslovakian Hussite.
Right.
I'm not sure if you know Hussites, but was the sort of Luther-like thing in the Czech lands, very much against tithes.
Against tithing, right? Yeah.
Waged a couple of wars.
I think a lot of people are against tithing, and I think there's probably good reason to be against tithing. So we actually explicitly have a no donations required at any level of membership policy. So you don't have to donate to become a fire member. You don't have to donate to become an earth member. No donations ever required ever. Of course, donations are encouraged. It does take money to run the operation. We try to keep the budget really as thin as possible, to have the lowest margins possible, so that way we can skip by on minimal donations. But it would really make a difference for us, frankly, if we had more donations. So that's the thing that, that's another way that people could potentially get involved in the future, is even if you're not in the San Diego area and maybe there's no hope of village being established in your area anytime soon, you can still donate to the cause, and that would help us grow more rapidly with more money, frankly. So we do encourage people to donate, but it's absolutely not required or expected.
Interesting.
Down the road, there may be things that we would institute. One of the things that is sort of being workshopped right now, it is not a doctrine or practice right now. So I really need to caveat that, like, we don't know that this will be a policy in the future, but we have talked about the idea of when people join, the different membership levels, that there might be a contract involved that entitles them to certain Aretean benefits, including things like an Aretean funeral when they die. Funerals are actually, if you've never had a loved one die, well, I can't speak for other countries. I know that, Luke, you're in Canada, and Martin, you're in the Czech Republic. So maybe it's different there, but at least in the United States, funerals are incredibly expensive. People really get kind of gouged on funerals, frankly. And so having the assemblage manage your funerary affairs is potentially a real big savings to your loved ones, to have them not encounter that expense right at this critical emotional time when their loved one has died, right? So we've thought about, maybe we could have the assemblage cover that kind of expense, and also wedding expenses and things like that. We might cover a whole lot of expenses for anyone who's actually a member of the community, with the caveat that maybe we get a certain percentage of assets donated to us when they die. And so you're already dead. You don't need those assets anymore. And maybe you pass some of that on as a charitable donation to us. And then getting assets is actually more useful to an organization than getting liquid cash, because the assets generate ongoing revenue for us. And so we don't have to keep asking for more cash. We can make our own cash, basically. So this is, I want to say that this is not policy yet. This is sort of an example of how Areteanism is continuing to develop over time, and that might maybe be a thing we develop into financially down the road.
I like that a lot, actually. That seems like a really interesting idea that I don't think I've ever heard as a central point for focus before, is just to get the money after they're gone, because they don't need it.
Right.
I guess that's the benefit of designing your religion intelligently. But
right.
Just one more question. I presume you're not planning to develop any superpowers like in Scientology? Or is it
I wish. I feel like if that was coming, it would have already happened. I would have already had the superpowers by now. Man, that would be so convenient.
So just again, a serious question though. So what is your plan on not becoming something like the Scientology?
Before, when I was talking about wishing I started this a few years earlier, The area where maybe I could have started this a few years earlier is maybe I could have been a little bit faster to realize that this would have been a safe thing to do. But I held off on establishing this for a solid 2 to 3 years, because once I had the idea of like, oh, what we need is a humanist religion, the thing that stopped me from doing it is saying, but like maybe 200 years from now, people are going to be bowing down to pictures of me on their wall or something like that, or maybe because it's the future, it'll be holograms of me or whatever, right? But I don't want that, right? That would really be perverting what the purpose of this is. So it took kind of a lot of time to think through the safety mechanisms that would protect against that, and then for whatever little risk remains, to get comfortable with that little bit of risk. So some of the safety mechanisms is, as I already mentioned, we believe that the intent of the law is the law. That's a really important one. So we believe in the human capacity for reason. We believe in your human capacity for reason. And we trust you to use it well. And one of the things we believe that people will basically behave in accordance with the trust that they are afforded. And so if you treat people like little kids, they're going to act like little kids. And if you treat people like mature adults, they'll act like mature adults. If you treat people with respect, they will act respectfully. And so so we trust people to make their own decisions. So for every point of doctrine, every ritual we have, everything, really it's up to your individual interpretation. So if we say something like we believe in physical fitness is one of our 30 aims of Areté, that's up to you to decide what physical fitness means. Does it mean being really buff, or does it mean just your heart is still pumping blood? That's up for you to decide. Of course, we can get some amount of community consensus, but it is okay if your interpretation is a little bit outside of the community consensus. You're empowered to do that. And so having that flexibility for individual interpretation, that does a whole lot to prevent toxicity of like, it has to be this way. And now, because it has to be this way, we have to have someone really be in charge with the band hammer to make it be that way, right? Like we do have leaders in the organization, and they do, help facilitate consensus, but because we don't have to have consensus, we don't have to have dictatorial power, right? So that's one of the major areas that we avoid that toxicity. I'll go ahead and break for, actually, Luke, maybe you got a question.
Yeah. So there's no real hard and fast commandments or laws as far as like health or no alcohol, no drugs or anything like that. Specifically, it's just kind of a guideline: be healthy, be the best person you can be. Whatever you can do. Is that pretty much it?
Right. I mean, so we definitely have a whole bunch of practices of things that we do. That I think that it's not unreasonable to say that you wouldn't really be an Aretean if you're not doing these things, because everyone holds these things in common definition. But even then, again, we make room for exceptions. So like one of our practices is meatless Mondays. We do that as part of a practice called Areteanism. So we specifically on the idea of like health and diet. That's our only diet guidance is Areteanism. And that means reducing your meat consumption. It also means reducing your consumerism in general, but specifically to reduce your meat consumption. Again, I'm going to speak from sort of this American-centric point of view, since that's what I've got. But we eat way too much meat here, and so even before you start to talk about like the ethical ramifications of like killing an animal to eat your food, like even before you get to that, just from an environmental standpoint, like the carbon output is, there's just no excuse for why Americans, and I would argue, I think most of the world at this point, has kind of followed our model, is just eating way too much meat. So Areteanism, how much should you reduce? Well, the intent of the law is the law. So that's up to you to decide how much you should reduce, right? We do have, as a way of sort of like trying to put some oomph behind it, we've got this communal practice of Meatless Monday, where we say, let's just all not do meat on Monday. That way we can maybe actually make a consumer impact, right? If none of us are buying meat on Monday, then maybe restaurants start to offer a discount for buy the vegetarian meal on Meatless Monday, that kind of thing. It makes it easier for other people who aren't even Aretean to get on board with the practice. So, yeah.
After hearing your explanations of how your rules are not to be taken literally, I can pitch you one commandment that you can maybe use, and that is, thou shalt not take scripture literally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we definitely believe, and I think that's sort of summed up in that idea of the intent of the law is the law. We are that is implicitly saying we are not literalists, we are interpretationists as opposed to literalists. And so what you find something on our website, like name any one of the 30 aims. Let's talk about honesty, or let's talk about courage, or let's talk about sorry, I'm going to draw a blank on trying to recite off all 30 aims of Areté because there's 30 of them. But for any one of these good things, and we say be this kind of person, it's still up to you to figure out what that means for your life, and that might look different than it looks in my life, and that is okay. And so I think that does a whole lot to prevent there being judgment, right? One of the things that I did not like about my own religious upbringing was feeling like there was a whole lot of looking over people's shoulders to kind of say, oh, that person did that. I'll kind of point to a silly example. There are more serious examples, but a silly example from my time growing up Mormon is people looking over each other's shoulders to see if you were drinking caffeinated Cokes, or that kind of thing, right? It's a point of contentious debate within the Mormon community about whether or not caffeine is prohibited or not. I'm not trying to answer that question right now, but the point is that there is debate, right? And as a result of that debate, you have people who are on one side of the debate who are very, carefully looking around at their neighbors to see, are you following the rules according to my interpretation of the rules? That's great.
It's just got the thought. I don't know why.
And so the point is that by explicit
apologies to all Mormons.
Yeah, from the beginning, from the time that you first learn about Areteanism and then go on to being a fire member, you're getting inculcated in this culture of non-judgment, of like literally my interpretation might be different than your interpretation, and that's okay. It does a whole lot. Maybe it doesn't solve everything, but it does a lot. It does a lot to remove some of that judgment of looking at your neighbors and saying, oh, they're not living the right way. Because what is the right way? It's about the right way for them, not the right way for you.
Although as a debater and political scientist, I have to tell you that there's still a fair chance that like 200-300 years from now, there will be like a bunch of Supreme Court judges arguing over what you literally meant by not taking things literally.
Yeah, well, yeah. Unfortunately, that's some of what I talk about of like getting comfortable with the risk. That like there is a certain amount that is outside of my control. Some of the things that I have done though is I have made it very clear. I've been on the record over and over and over and over again about no statues of me. Period. No statues of me. Period.
You should write it like this, like write it literally like you said it right now. It's like multiple like spelled out words, period, so that it's
right.
No possibility of misinterpreting.
Right. And so that's not to say that there couldn't be a statue about the founding of Areteanism, but that is different than having a statue of Colin Campbell, right? There's a great movie, Glory, that's with Matthew Broderick, that's about the American Civil War and about this regiment from Boston, which is where I grew up, that was led by a white commander, but it was all black people, sort of ex-slaves that had joined this regiment to go fight in the Civil War. And because they were from Boston, there's a great statue of this in Boston, and I really love it. It's not a statue to the commander, right? It's a statue about the action of the bravery of that entire regiment volunteering for duty and then volunteering for the front lines. And ever since I saw that statue as a kid growing up in Boston, I was convinced that is the right way to do statues, right? We don't need to have a statue to a person because people are complicated. They do good things, but they also do bad things. And frankly, while I have done some good things, and I would hope even some great things, I've also done some bad things. Just straight up, I've done some bad things. And I think that if people really went digging, they might get shocked at how bad some of the things I've done are. My qualification to be the founder of this is not based off of being a perfect person. My qualification has to do with the fact that I put this much work into the design process. That's what my qualifications are. So anyways, the point is that, in terms of the risk of, this going off the rails down the road, I've been very, very clear. We can have statues about the establishment of Areteanism because that is an action, but no statues of me. And I think that being clear about that, reduces the risk of that. If someone still does that 200 years from now, that's not my fault. If someone is bowing down to statues of me 200 years from now, that is their fault, not mine.
I guess you could haunt them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he'll still be alive if we can cure the whole aging thing. That's
right.
definitely.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I do hope to live a very long life, maybe even hundreds of years. I actually am in favor of opening those kind of pathways to humans. But if I'm dead, the point is that would still be bad. But the point is that I shouldn't let that hypothetical possibility, maybe that there will be bad 200 years from now, stop me from doing what good I can do right now. And the good I can do is, my particular skill set is this kind of design work, is making this kind of thing happen, getting a small nascent movement off the ground. That's my skill set. So for me to not do that would be for me to not provide the good to the world that I can provide.
Although if you're still alive when it happens, if it happens, then you could be at least like swatting them with a rolled up newspaper.
Right, exactly. I would do that. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I really would love to see this take off, Colin. I'm very excited for you, excited for the movement. I was super excited to kind of know that something like this was going on. I've been kind of thinking about things like this for almost 20 years myself in some way. And for those who don't know, I'm a Mormon myself. I've been, through thick and thin, through a lot of different things in my life, a lot of challenges and struggles. But I've always kind of had the open mind that, there's lots of other good religions, there's lots of other good concepts out there. And this is definitely one of the best concepts I found in my 20 years of kind of searching through religion, searching through ideas as far as what could work theoretically for everybody and what's open-minded enough to accept everyone in the world without kind of saying I'm right, you're wrong, or bashing or whatever it might be. So I'm excited for it, and I'm hopefully somehow we can kind of help in some small way through the movement. And if anyone's watching this and wants to take part, please go to the website Assembly of Ari. What's the website?
Areteanism is going to be the fastest link there. So yeah, that's Arete is Areté. So Areteanism is Areteanism.org. Areteanism.
We'll try to post the link either at the end or as part of the video. But anyway, that's where you start. Reach out to Colin, please, and post comments. Let us know what you think about Areteanism. And any final comments or questions, Martin, from your side as far as wrap up?
Well, I was thinking about it because I'm not very a big fan of religious ritual. I am personally, I am a spiritual person, but I'm more intuitive than ritualistic, I would say, if that makes any sense. So I'm also generally not a joiner of groups. I'm also more of an individualist to an extreme degree, somewhat. But I am a big fan of the Greco-Roman worldview and philosophy generally. I think it's called classical for a reason, because I think there was actually a lot of what could be called science in it back in the day, or at least I think it was the historically first documented, fairly scientific spiritual doctrine overall. Because like I said, with the astrology, that's also uses the elements, and those are supposed to be meaningful, conceptual, theoretical things. It's supposed to mean something, it's supposed to be logical, it's supposed to all make sense, and it's supposed to be tied into the realities of the world, as in the case of the celestial mechanics. So it sort of was at the dawn of science, if I guess it could be described that way. I mean, there was other things in other parts of the world. I don't want to diminish it. Like, this is definitely like in the Western whole history and sphere, the main thing of this kind. There could have been, I think, maybe Zoroastrianism or like some other doing some sort of similar things. I think some Vedas in India and in the Hindu tradition are also much in the same vein. So I definitely like if there's supposed to be a religion and if it's supposed to have some sort of rituals, then I guess this would be the best version of it, in my personal opinion, because I do kind of like if there is supposed to be a ritual, like let's make it make sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you, Luke, for a great compliment as well. I think that maybe my closing note, if people will allow me to apply just a little bit of proselytizing, not just explaining, but sort of like to actually make my case for joining here. I don't want to pressure either of you specifically, too much, but I do want to put a little bit of pressure on people generally to make the sacrifice and consider joining. I really resonate with the idea of, being an extreme individualist and not being much of a joiner and that kind of thing. That I get it. But I think that the reality is that given the polycrisis we're facing, we're going to need to make some sacrifices. And that ranges from like recycling more to eating less meat to whatever, right? And that it actually is a little bit easier to do it in a framework, first of all, for ourselves, that, to do all the things that we need to do. It's a little bit easier when you have community backing, you have symbolical, support, that's sort of reminding you to do these things. But maybe even more important than the personal benefit, because I think that there's a lot of great people out there who for themselves don't need Areteanism because they're already a great person. The difference you can make by joining the organization and helping it get stronger, so that way it can reach out to more people who do need it. That is something that I think is worth considering. That even if you don't need Areteanism, Areteanism needs you, right? We need you to make that little bit of sacrifice to your concept of identity, instead of just being, I'm my own special snowflake, to make the sacrifice to say, I'm an Aretean. And then that way, when people ask you what you are, you say, I'm an Aretean. And then they go, oh, what's that? And they learn about it, and it helps it spread. If you'll give me one more minute, I'll make a reference to the growth of veganism. Without making a comment about whether or not veganism is good or bad, just talking about the growth of the movement. I want to say that veganism started in 1942, if I'm remembering correctly. So in 1941, there were 0 vegans, 0, right? There were lots of people who were only eating plant-based diets, but they weren't vegan because there literally hadn't been a word for vegan yet, right? But those, there was only like, a few thousand across the entire globe that were eating plant-based exclusively diets in 1941. 1942, there were 6 vegans, right? 6 people officially came together and coined the term vegan, and now that became a thing. And every single year, without a single exception, every single year, the number of vegans in the world has increased. Even though some people drop out of being vegan, the total number of vegans every single year has increased. And now there are literally tens of millions of vegans in the world, right? And so the reason why that kind of growth was possible was because people made the sacrifice from, I'm just my own self and I eat a plant-based diet because I want to, right? To saying, no, my identity is vegan, right? And so having that term really made a difference for the growth of that movement and ultimately for the world. I am not a vegan, but I get the benefit of eating plant-based meat when I go to the supermarket, right? Because vegans existed, right? And so likewise, if you can make the sacrifice to be an Aretean, even if you don't really need to be an Aretean, you're helping contribute to that growth to actually change the world, to save the world together.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to throw in a final comment as well to add on to that, is that Martin says he's not a joiner, but he joined me in saving the world together. So the fact that he's here 2 years later into this movement.
I haven't, in all the podcasts,
need to drink more cola.
I haven't heard the story of how you guys met. So, maybe that's in there and I just haven't caught it yet. But
it's a good story. We'll share it with you at some point if you don't see it. But basically just through online Medium articles mostly. But I had a book, The 4 Pillars of Utopia, that he helped me with. That's where it all started, and it's evolved into now 7 pillars of protopia, which is a better word than utopia. But we're actually right now working with Nova McCourt from New Zealand. He's actually from Vancouver, but he's living in New Zealand. And we're starting a brand new action-oriented wing of Saving the World Together. Haven't decided the exact name for it yet, but probably some form of contributism is a word we're kind of working with. And I think It falls very well in line with Areteanism as far as just contributing to making the world better. And we'll be sharing a lot more about this in future podcasts, I'm sure, as we talk more about it. We've got our weekly meetings as well as a separate thing. But I could definitely see Areteanism fitting in very well with the whole contributism movement and getting people to just join together to contribute to making the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to me that what you guys are doing with this podcast, at the very least, is extremely Aretean. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, after your argument, which was very fair argument, and as a debater, I would have to say pretty good argument for joining to non-joiners. I would say that maybe the main reason I haven't joined any religious group was that joining any Greco-Roman actual originalist religion wasn't a thing that a person could do because it didn't exist at the time.
Right. Yeah. That's why, I would have joined this if it had been available, but it wasn't available, so I had to make it. Fortunately, now it's available and people can just join it. It's a lot easier to join than to have to make it from scratch.
No, I think it was actually, the only place it lived was in fantasy.
Right.
Like in fantasy and like the Dungeons and Dragons people and stuff, I think like a lot of the inspiration for that. So a lot of the people who are like would describe themselves as agnostic or skeptics or atheistic would be role playing these kinds of Greco-Roman elemental spiritual ideas.
Yeah, I'm a big D&D player myself, so I know exactly what you mean.
Absolutely. We play Magic the Gathering a fair bit. But there's a lot of fun stories out there. We love them. We love them all. And the more we can synergize and share with each other and just kind of feel good about progressing together towards a better world and the protopian visions of a better future. So I think that's a pretty good place to stop for today. Hopefully we'll continue our discussions, and maybe we'll have Colin on again someday as things progress. Thanks so much for joining us. If you've made it this far, we really appreciate your comments and your feedback and everything that helps this movement move forward. I think that's a wrap for today. Thanks so much to Colin for being here with us, and let's save the world together. Bye-bye for now.